What's up, everyone? I know I was supposed to do Rocky 3 this week, but I just watched two movies that really caught my attention and has me thinking about the everlasting argument that has been discussed over the last 20 years. Which movie's better, Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Space Jam? To me, it will always be Who Framed Roger Rabbit, hands down. But just so you know that this is not some biased opinion, I'll give my reasons why. First, a little history lesson. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was released in 1988. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis. It was the very first live-action film of its kind, blending live action with cartoons. While the concept wasn't new, it was the first project of this scale to do it. The movie has become historic for many reasons. My favorite is the fact that it blends both the Warner Brothers cartoon characters with the Disney cartoon characters. Possibly the only time we will ever see that sort of thing happen. Space Jam was released in 1995 and was directed by Joe Pytka. Unlike Roger Rabbit, this film only featured the Looney Tunes characters and starred arguably the biggest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan. Again, I'm going to give my reasons why Space Jam will never beat Who Framed Roger Rabbit, so let's get started with reason one, and that's the story. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is about a detective named Eddie Valiant who is out to solve a case behind the murder of Marvin Acme, who owns Toontown. Space Jam centers around Michael Jordan being pulled into Looney Tune Land to play a basketball game with a bunch of aliens. Roger Rabbit just has a far more interesting story. It's a story that caters to a wide audience and not just a singular part of it. Also, the story, despite how cheesy it might be, gets serious on occasion and develops the live-action characters very well. Some have argued against the movie's appeal towards kids because the story is not exactly the kid type of story, despite it including cartoons. However, in all fairness, it's not like the kids are going to give a crap about the story. All they care about is when the tunes are appearing on the screen in front of them. In all honesty, a lot of my friends who are around my age didn't care for the story until they got older. Also, being a detective story fan, I have a large appreciation for the story, and I'm grateful that it didn't insult that genre. In fact, adding the cartoon characters actually made it more interesting. Space Jam's story is not as well thought out. Where Roger Rabbit worked well for a broad audience with its story, Space Jam feels rather dumbed down. The story isn't as broad and isn't nearly as dramatic or effective as Roger Rabbit. A lot of the problems stem from the fact that Space Jam had 4 writers. According to rumor, each writer had different ideas and they combined those ideas to fit a singular plot, as best as it could. I'm sure the final idea sounded good in the screenplay, but the results are too congested. There's too many subplots in this movie that go nowhere. With Roger Rabbit, each main character has a subplot, but it all fits with the main plot. With Space Jam, the subplots are introduced briefly, but don't mesh at all with the main plot. For instance, Michael Jordan's family and his relationship with his son, that goes nowhere fast. You'd think for a movie like this, especially since the beginning clearly establishes Michael's relationship with his own father, that they would have stretched the story a bit for Michael and his son. But no, the son gets a total of 3 scenes and a minimum of about 5 lines. Another difference here is the humor of each film. I can talk about this subject forever, but I'll try to keep it brief. Roger Rabbit's humor does cater to a mass audience. There's humor here for adults as well as kids. However, the humor in Roger Rabbit has gotten the most arguments, some claiming the humor is too adult-friendly, while others saying it's a perfect mix of humor for everybody. While I'll agree with the latter, I do see where the others are coming from. This mainly has to do with a lot of the sexual innuendos in this movie, and there are a lot. But it should be noted that the humor doesn't come from any of the Disney characters or Looney Tunes, it's mainly the adult characters in the film. That's what's really cool about this movie. The creators were respectful to the cartoon characters and their personalities. Also, they captured the differences between the Disney characters and the Looney Tunes characters perfectly. The best example I can give is Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse. This was my favorite scene in the movie. These two characters in the same shot was classic. However, the difference between their personalities was made quite clear. Bugs will pull the practical jokes and will be rather mean, while Mickey Mouse is more understanding and kind. Granted, he doesn't do anything to stop Bugs, but that's besides the point. Also, in Roger Rabbit, the cartoons are legitimately funny and will always make you laugh. Can the same be said for Space Jam? Yes and no. Space Jam's humor is again kid-friendly. However, that is the biggest problem here as far as the Looney Tunes are concerned. People have got to remember, the Looney Tunes, while popular with kids, were also rather popular with adults too. Why? Because the Looney Tunes humor greatly contrasted Disney's cartoons. They were edgy for their time and were rather violent on a lot of occasions. And this is my biggest problem with the Looney Tunes and Space Jam. It's that the writers don't respect the classic humor that made these characters popular in the first place. In fact, it feels as though they've dumbed down the Looney Tunes characters a bit. A couple of personalities have actually been changed. Bugs is especially different. Chuck Jones himself commented on this, stating that Bugs Bunny should have defeated the aliens in the first 7 minutes of the movie. I can see this being funny for those unfamiliar with the Looney Tunes, but for those of us that know the Looney Tunes by heart, this is just disappointing. The last subject is the acting, in this case the live actors' performances with the cartoon characters. In Roger Rabbit, Bob Hoskins and Christopher Lloyd are just naturals at it. Hoskins gives such a great performance in this movie. The most impressive part is that none of the actors are really acting with anything next to them. The choking scene with Judge Doom and Roger, Christopher Lloyd is holding a doll that's designed to look like Roger. It takes a lot of skill as an actor to pull something like that off. Also, the acting's nice because the adults act like adults. Valiant has a drinking problem and goes through troubles with his ex, and the cartoons act like cartoons. It's a great contrast in personalities. In Space Jam, the acting in general is just off. It doesn't help that Michael Jordan can't act to save his life. In fact, almost every basketball player in this can't act, except for one, and that's the one with the smallest role, and that's Larry Bird. To this movie's credit, Bill Murray is legitimately funny. That's the biggest problem. This movie should have starred Bill Murray and not Michael Jordan because Murray is used to playing rather cartoony roles anyways and would blend in with him perfectly. That's it. That's my final conclusion on Space Jam. Murray should have been the star and part of the creative process, and Jordan should have made a cameo, period. So overall, in all seriousness, Roger Rabbit did everything right while Space Jam failed. I can see why Space Jam would be appealing to a kid, but it's nice that a movie like Roger Rabbit can be just as entertaining to me now as it was when I was a kid. Well everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.